Greetings to our kings, queens, and everyone in between. Welcome to Melanin Muses.
Mindful knowledge, healing heart. We are your muses.
Cleo.
And Calliope, but you can call me Callie. We're here to give you a safe space to open your mind
and to heal your heart while adding a dash of melanin flavor.
Disclaimer: we are not legal, mental, or health professionals. Although we're actively researching the topics we discuss and fact-checking our resources, please note that we are only giving our opinions and not professional advisory.
If you wish to get professional advice, please seek out the help of a certified professional or therapist. Let us begin. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Melanin Muses. Today, we will be talking about media's romantic take on sexual assault and trauma. So here's your trigger warning.
Please understand that the topic we're going to discuss today could be potentially harmful for individuals who've encountered these situations either in their personal life or have known someone who has encountered these situations. We will be discussing self-harm, abuse in its various forms: physical, mental, emotional, psychological. We will be discussing problematic portrayals of love under the guise, or rather the other way around, trauma under the guise of love. So if this is a topic that you're particularly sensitive to, I would advise that you watch and listen to another episode that we have that's a little more lighthearted and easier to digest. But if you are content with this content, please listen, and I hope this is a welcomed message for you all.
Thank you for giving our warning. I know this can be definitely a heavy topic and a sensitive topic for many people, also even including myself, who has been through sexual trauma and other things as well. But I do feel that this topic is one of those where people try to keep it on the hush hush rather than being open and communicating it with communicating with others about it, which I completely understand. But if by us having this episode can help show people, both men, women, non-binary, whatever you identify with, just to show you that you are not alone, then I'm happy that we are actually having this episode so that way we can connect with you guys and show you are not alone, you are loved, and you are valued, and these experiences do not define you. So yeah.
We're about to get heavy, but we're here and we're going to do it together. Discussing self-harm, abuse in its various forms: physical, mental, emotional, psychological. We will be discussing problematic portrayals of love under the guise, or rather the other way around, trauma under the guise of love. So if this is a topic that you're particularly sensitive to, I would advise that you watch and listen to another episode that we have that's a little more lighthearted and easier to digest. But if you are content with this content, please listen, and I hope this is a welcomed message for you all.
Thank you for giving our warning. I know this can be definitely a heavy topic and a sensitive topic for many people, also even including myself, who has been through sexual trauma and other things as well. But I do feel that this topic is one of those where people try to keep it on the hush hush rather than being open and communicating it with communicating with others about it, which I completely understand. But if by us having this episode can help show people, both men, women, non-binary, whatever you identify with, just to show you that you are not alone, then I'm happy that we are actually having this episode so that way we can connect with you guys and show you are not alone, you are loved, and you are valued, and these experiences do not define you. So yeah.
We're about to get heavy, but we're here and we're going to do it together. So,
Most definitely. So let's get started. I believe so. Just an overview. The way we're discussing this is like, let's start from the beginning. I think that would be a great way to start. Like, I believe the media tends to start romanticizing sexual trauma and abuse from a young age. And would you like to give like a more specific definition of what we mean by this? Because I know there could be many different definitions of this and levels and escalations of this. So would you mind clarifying that first before we jump into specifics?
yes. So, what we so
Most definitely. So let's get started. I believe so. Just an overview. The way we're discussing this is like, let's start from the beginning. I think that would be a great way to start. Like, I believe the media tends to start romanticizing sexual trauma and abuse from a young age. And would you like to give like a more specific definition of what we mean by this? Because I know there could be many different definitions of this and levels and escalations of this. So would you mind clarifying that first before we jump into specifics?
yes. So, what we mean by the romanticization of trauma and sexual assault is given when we are younger, we are taught that love can be shown through romantic mediums in various forms: hand holding, hugging, kissing, the pursuit of a romantic interest through means of romantic letters and speaking to people a certain way, playing shy, all of the above. But what we don't discuss is appropriate consent and behaviors involved, as well as personal boundaries and maintaining a sense of self when you are pursuing the love and affection of other people. Now, many people in their home lives do not receive love and affection by in a healthy way. So for example, if you have a parent that didn't pay attention to you as a child, that refused to give you hugs and kisses when you asked for them, was not a very supportive or kind person when they spoke to you or spent time with you in a meaningful way by encouraging your passions. These this lack of attention, affection, support, and overall positive reinforcement of healthy communications can manifest themselves in behaviors where, when you get older, you seek those things from romantic partners uh, by any means necessary. And that could mean if you didn't receive uh, loving words from people growing up, you seek those words either from strangers or try to provoke them by making yourself seem more desirable. You wish to be called pretty, so you dress more provocatively, and that people will call you pretty. But what many people don't understand is that there are consequences, and it's not your fault. This is your natural response to what you are lacking, and you do it in the best way you believe will get you those results. Other people take advantage of that. Other people will try to project their own insecurities and lack of affection onto you by taking advantage of that vulnerable state and using that situation to their benefit while disregarding the needs and the desires of the other person. And with that said, we will dive into a particularly troubling scenario that comes in the form of a manga or a Korean manga by the name of Killing Stalking. Now, I'm not sure how familiar other people are with this particular um, bit of reading, but it was written and illustrated by a person named Koji and was published online in both Korean and English for people to read, and was the dates that it was distributed were between 2016 and 2019. Now, it does have a relatively large following now in 2021 on TikTok and Tumblr by young audiences, particularly young girls who find the content of this manga to be romantic. I will tell you now, it is that's the furthest description that this manga should receive, simply because it depicts scenes of trauma, scenes of brutality, scenes of murder, rape, coercion, and overall a very unhealthy way of managing trauma and dealing with it by using other people as a way of escaping consequences. So, before I get started, let's do a little check in. Leo, tell me how you feel about this particular topic.
When it comes to this topic, I can actually, prior to us actually recording this podcast, I was doing some research and looking up this manhwa. And just from looking at the Google images, it was a little bit triggering, quite frankly, because like some of the images just really showed how how toxic and how bad this manga really is in terms of this romanticization. You know what I mean? And just trying to say, oh well, he's abusing this person, but it's drawn in a way that it's seductive. It's drawn in a way that's supposed to be sexy and sexual, and you should want this because ooh la la, like um, and just even just hearing about like the brief synopsis of it, which is very overwhelming in a way because I can relate to being in situations where uh into toxic relationships that to me felt like, oh, this is what a relationship is supposed to be like. Um and I can share later about my own personal experiences after we discuss more about this, but it's things like this, especially because you said a lot of the following encompasses young girls, like high school age. It's reinforces how strong of an influence the media has on our younger generation, and the generations to come. Because what we read, what we listen to, what we watch, these things pretty much um, build and design our mentality and perspective of life. And if we're doing is listening to like, even within our own community, the Black community, a lot of the music that's kind of pushed on us is like all these, excuse my language, like these bitches and hoes and ride or dies and just the drug, sex, and killing people. If this is all the stuff that we're hearing, this is like the identity we start taking on. Like, this is all I'm good for is X, Y, and Z thing, in comparison to if you listen to things or watch things that are more motivational and inspirational, and it's a complete opposite. But once, if you actually look at the media, if like, for example, for Snoop, for good old Snoop, um I didn't know this until I actually watched an interview. Like, a lot of his music before held the um bitches and hoes and drugs and stuff like that when it came to his music, but then he actually came out with a I think a gospel album, and it was not promoted. No one knew about it because that is not what sells. That is not what makes money. And that's not what the media wants to promote, is peace and harmony. They like to have this destruction because that keeps people buying things. That keeps it interesting because most people are so drowned in this chaos that that's what they feed on. And anything that's actually loving and caring, that doesn't sell. Sex sells. And that's the problem, is that society is pushing things like this manhwa, things like the music that we listen to, in all these problematic situations. They push it on these generations to formulate these toxic mentalities, to perpetuate these behaviors into a never ending cycle. And that's why a lot of us end up going through a lot of this trauma, because we think it's okay in the beginning. And then once we're entangled in these situations, it's incredibly difficult to not only get out of it, but change your mindset to understand, like, this is not okay. I deserve better. So like conversations like these need to be happening a lot more often, to dispel these mindsets of this behavior is not okay, it's not healthy, and should not be romanticized at all. So yeah, anyway, let's get into this manga, because people, y'all will understand what I mean when you hear about the premise and the storyline of this series.
Hmm. Now, I will say that this manga is labeled as being a drama, a horror, and a psychological horror. It's the fan base that has twisted the narrative to fit what they consider to be romantic drama. But I will say there is nothing romantic about the going ons between the two main protagonists. Uh, Yoon Bum is the young man who is smaller in stature, very reserved and quiet in his appearance. He's also very effeminate in his appearance because he's smaller and more slight than other men are. The other main character is Oh Sung Woo, and he has a completely different persona. He's a very large gentleman, broad shoulders, very strong. He has a delinquent haircut in that his the top of his hair is dyed blonde as opposed to having his natural jet black hair. He is an opposing figure in that he's confident, he's cool, he's fit, he's attractive, and he gets what he wants because he's very good at talking to people, despite not really caring about many people. So both characters have been subjected to extreme trauma in their younger years. So, for example, Yoon Bum he is an orphan, and he was taken in by his uncle and his grandmother. Unfortunately, his uncle was an alcoholic and was incredibly abusive toward him. He would beat him, he would feed him scraps, and the grandmother really had no power in the situation to kind of help him. So she would try to make excuses for her son by explaining that he was just a sad man and that he actually does love you. It's not that he's being mean, he's just very sad and this is how he expresses it. That's very wrong, first and foremost. Your family members should not take out any of their misfortunes on you. You're not a punching bag. You are not a sense of relief for anyone else because you are your own person and you have your agency. So that's where we went wrong in the beginning. Additionally, Yoon Bum's uncle would sexually assault him regularly. And it was because he said that he looked so much like the mother who he was dating before his brother married her and had Yoon Bum. So there was a bit of resentment and jealousy that came out through sexual assault toward him. And that was a very traumatizing scenario for him because it hints at the sense that he was already questioning his sexuality at the time as a young kid. And that sexual assault from his uncle made him question it even more, which is a very dangerous situation to find yourself in when affection is given to you without your consent and against your will. And now, in the event that you enjoyed it, because the human body responds to stimuli naturally, whether we are consciously aware of it or not. So his body responded to what was happening to him and he began to confuse it very easily. This is very important. Remember this because moving forward, that's something we'll touch on again. Skipping forward to Oh Sung Woo, who is essentially, I guess you would consider him the primary antagonist com- based on how he treats Yoon Bum. Oh Sung-woo grew up in an abusive household as well. His father was also very abusive, but his mother unfortunately was mentally ill. She gave birth to Sung-woo and had severe post-traumatic or postpartum depression, which if you're not familiar with that, it's when the chemicals in a woman's brain after giving birth make it very difficult for her to bond with her child. She does essentially develop depression, and it is very hard for her to connect with her child. And it can be very dangerous when it comes to those caregiving instincts because there's a lot of apathy where there should be nurturing and care and just general love for a child. It's not her fault. but it was not addressed and it was not treated. And unfortunately, her son bore the brunt of that. Additionally, she did try to make amends for attempting to suffocate him as an infant by overindulging in affection with him to the point where he was also sexually assaulted by his mother as she tried to overcompensate with the lack of love she provided him earlier in life. When it came to the husband beating her and, essentially neglecting her, she went so far as to poison him with rat poison. And then she made her son believe that he was the one that killed his father. So there was a lot of mental and emotional manipulation. There was a lot of gaslighting. There was a lot of red flags in both of these individuals' lives early on that continued into their young adult life. So I'm going to stop right there and we're going to do a quick check in. So, what do you think, Cleo?
That, well, number one, like this is kind of like, I didn't honestly read too much into the story before this episode because I also wanted to connect like with you viewers if you're listening to it the first time. So this is genuinely, I'm just mind blown and baffled because I didn't know any of this backstory of the characters and how severe it actually is when it comes to what's going on. You know what I mean? And it's crazy that the author had this type of, I guess, I don't know. It makes me wonder like the strength. Is it strength? Is there something going on to the author who is able to come up with this story? Like I'm not trying to question their integrity. I'm not trying to bash them, but to be able to come up with something so dark and something so like a different level of like taboo, like what was going through their mind as you write this? Because for those of you who are not writers, to be an effective writer and actually a really good one, you have to immerse yourself in the story. You have to put part of yourself into the characters in order to connect with them and to make them realistic. You have to have a different level of immersion into your story to the point where the characters come to life. So to be able to not only write the story, but to have someone be able to draw these scenes, it's just a completely different level of mind. I don't know, it's fascinating to me, and I'm curious as to what their perspectives on it when they were creating this. But to have taboo topics of like a mother sexually harassing their child. Like I read an article about that the other day. I think you actually posted it.
I did.
Yeah, it was an article
Mm-hmm.
that you posted on Facebook, but
Mm-hmm.
of the taboo idea of a parent sexually molesting the child. It's just so unthinkable that people don't even want to consider that it's in existence, that it
Mm-hmm.
happens. And
Yeah.
it probably happens more than we actually think. And it's just, it's mind boggling because I can't even imagine that. Like, is there a recovery period from that? How do you recover from that? What type of therapy would you need in order to reprogram your mind to recognize that that was not a healthy love? Because as a child, you look to your parent as that savior and hero, and like they're the ones making the decisions whether you live or die. They're taking care of you, so you can't necessarily understand that what they're doing is not okay. You just think they're showing affection, you just think that they're showing love. But when you get out to the real world and someone tells you, dude, that's not okay, like what are you doing, it can be so life altering. Like I can't imagine the trauma that this character has gone through, and the other character having like the alcoholic relative, and the other relative is like, well, they're making excuses. Unfortunately, like that happens so often, and people don't recognize that you can't, like Callie was saying earlier, you can't make excuses for those relatives who happen to be drug addicts or who happen to be alcoholics. Like if they're doing something that's detrimental to another person's mentality or physical state, you cannot make excuses because you are just invalidating that child who is experiencing those issues. It's up to you to step up and actually do something or remove that child from that situation. Don't just make excuses like, oh well, they're your family. No, that's not the case.
That's
You need to remove
unacceptable.
them from that situation
Hmm.
because that's going to be incredibly harmful for them when they grow up.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, like to even be able to come up with that, it's heartbreaking listening to their backstories. And even though they are not real characters, things like this happen, whether we like to think about it or not. And it's heartbreaking hearing about that. But please continue.
So that's the tip of this iceberg. This is the little bit of backstory to help kind of understand the characters a little more and to say it's not an excuse for the future behavior that occurs in the coming volumes. It's more so an in depth look into the potential factors that contributed to the overall experiences that these people went through, fictional or otherwise. So, moving forward, uh, you might be able to explain this a little bit better than I can, Cleo, because both Yunbum and Oh Sang-woo had to go into military service in Korea. So could you explain that a little bit more? Because that's also a big piece of this.
Okay, so in Korea, from the basics of what I do know, what I've heard from local friends, in Korea, there's a mandatory 2 year service, a mandatory service. I think they actually lowered it recently, but before there's a mandatory service where every male has to serve at least 2 years in the military. It's just a requirement that they have to do. Um, and during that time, usually I think you have to go before you are like 30-ish. And the only way that you can get out of it is like if there's like a debilitating circumstance or something, rather, kind of like mental disability or maybe a physical disability. Some people also opt out to do a different service instead of military. I believe um, sometimes if they can't, like if they don't have the vision or some type of medical issue, they can opt to work as like a police officer instead, like do some police duty, or they can work in a school with kids with disabilities. There's some alternatives that they can do if they can't actually do the physical training required, but they do have to do the mandatory service. If viewers would like, I can see if I can find a local friend of mine who is willing to talk about some of their experiences if we want to get a more in-depth view of what they are able to share about their military service.
And it's important to know because, as I described earlier, the character of Yoon is very slight. He's very small in stature. He's very effeminate in his appearance for that reason. And he actually believed that he would be exempt from his military service as a result of his less than muscular abilities. But lo and behold, he was not. He was still enlisted. And during his time there, he was bullied for his physical appearance. People called him a girl. People like made fun of him. They made a lot of rape jokes toward him. And he was even assaulted by some of his fellow servicemen, where he was almost raped. And it was actually Oh Sung Woo who saved him. And from that moment, unfortunately, Yoon Bum began to fixate on Oh Sung Woo because that was the first time anyone had ever come to his aid. Anyone who had ever helped him or stepped in to intervene when something bad was happening because his grandmother never did it for him and his classmates always made fun of him. So he began to see Oh Sung Woo as a savior of him. Uh, and he began to associate those feelings with love, romantic love, because why else would someone help me if they didn't love me? And once he left the service, he actually found out where Oh Sung-woo lived and went to his home and made attempted to kind of get into his house, looking at the keypad that's a lock for his front door. He managed to figure out the keypad by looking at the worn down numbers. This is how fixated he was on Sungwoo. He managed to get into the house. and he heard some noises coming from the closet, so he went to investigate, and he found there was a trap door that led into the basement. And so he's like, okay, I wonder what this is. So he went into the basement, and there he found a bound and gagged naked woman who had broken ankles and was crying desperately. And he went to, take off her blindfold and her gag and, wanted to see, like, are you okay? What's happening? And she's screaming at the top of her lungs for him to get away and to go away and leave now, because Sung Woo had actually come home and found him down there in the basement and caught him by surprise and hit him in the back of the head with a baseball bat to knock him unconscious. Unfortunately, when he came to, he too was also bound and gagged and, naked. Not really, he had underwear on. But basically, he was stripped of his clothing in a very vulnerable position and essentially kidnapped and hogtied. And Sung Woo had murdered the girl because he figured, she's not useful anymore. He'd captured that girl because she had made fun of him, or she made herself out to be better than him, and he was not going to allow for that. So she had to suffer, and he did that. Unfortunately, he was going to continue to attack Yoon Bum because he's like, "How did you get into my place? Like, who are you? What do you want?" kind of thing. And when he thought he was going to die, Yoon Bum kind of blurted out that he was in love with Sung Woo. And he's like, "I've always been in love with you. I just wanted to be close to you. I'm sorry. Please don't kill me. I just want to be with you." And he's like, "Oh, well, if you want to be with me, that's all you had to say. But you can't be with me with your legs like that." And so he broke Yoon Bum's ankles to keep him in the basement so that he couldn't escape. And this is the beginning of the manga and the saga that goes on in this tale of abuse and murder and just overall, I would say this is the best representation of Stockholm syndrome that I've seen in the media to date, because Yoonbum actually believes that he is in love with Sungwoo. He believes that everything that Sungwoo is doing is for his benefit because he's the only person that could love him. And on the flip side, Sungwoo is, I would say, I'm not allowed to diagnose people officially, but based on the evidence in his behaviors, I would say that he is a narcissist in the purest sense, in that he is very self centered. He has a very grandized version of himself in his mind. He is willing to use other people to get what he wants and then discard them just as quickly. And he gets irrationally angry when he feels like other people aren't taking him seriously or disrespecting him within his viewpoint of what respect is. Uh, it's a very hard read when you look at it from that perspective, because everything that Songwoo is doing to Yoon Bum is for his benefit alone and the control that he has. So that's just the tip of this iceberg. What do you think about that, Cleo?
Girl, I'm over here like mouth dropping, like the type, and this is only the beginning of this nonsense.
Uh-huh.
Like,
It gets worse.
it, oh, I believe it. Like, and this is interesting because I found a point to kind of poke at, like, not necessarily to be devil's advocate, to like advocate his behavior, because his behavior is like really despicable, but it's kind of like it definitely, how do I say this appropriately? So to play devil's advocate, and this is not me trying to perpetuate his behavior, to excuse his behavior at all. What the serial killer dude is doing is just terrible. It's very terrible. But it was an interesting point that you brought up where you mentioned that the girl that he killed was someone who antagonized him, or who made fun of him, or who was disrespectful to him, and made herself to be better than him and like trying to put him down. So that point kind of stuck out to me the most, because even though he is a narcissist, it kind of is perpetuating like that breaking point. You know what I mean? To like people who've been treated horrendously most of their life, who just kind of suppress, but yet they're still supposed to walk around with a smile. They're still supposed to walk around like nothing happened. And it gets to a point where that one person can say the wrong thing and it can make them snap. And that kind of is a point that I want to point out, because the people out there who go out of their way to torment others. And that's why you have like these school shootings happening. You have all this other crap happening, because that's what bothers me. It's a whole nother topic, but how people can bully to an extreme extent. Like they'll be beating these other kids. They'll be breaking them down, tearing them down, be like, well, you'll never be loved. You're ugly. You're fat. You're stupid. You're this, you're that, throwing their heads in the toilet. That stuff is kind of romanticized also in like the American movies. Like I hear from international people all the time, like, does that stuff actually happen in American schools? Because that's all they see in our movies. And it I can understand, even if the behavior is not excused, why some of these kids snap and wind up snapping back. But then what pisses me off are these kids who end up getting hurt in the backfire, who were the cause of the issue. Saying, oh my God, I don't know why they suddenly stop, because like, oh my God, like, because you were the ones antagonizing this individual. You were the ones who were beating them down to a point where they felt like they had to bite back for once in their life. And that's what people don't understand, is you saying these snide behind comments just to make yourself feel better could break someone, because you don't know, by calling someone ugly or a whore or a slut, by calling them all these derogatory names, for example, by calling a woman a slut or a whore because you assume they sleep with people because of the way they dress, you don't know, this woman could have got raped. This woman could have got beat behind closed doors. And by calling her a whore or slut, you're just victim blaming, saying, oh, well, because you wear this, that's why you got raped. Seriously? Like, people don't understand the gravity of the words that they have. And it can cause someone to break. It can cause someone to snap, especially if you do try and seek help and someone tries to laugh in your face. Because I know someone that happened to, they knew they were suffering with depression. They tried to go get help, and that doctor laughed in their face about it due
Oh
to
my
cultural
gosh.
differences. They're just like,
Mm-mm.
haha, no, that's not, you're not really depressed. Get over it.
Wow.
It's like, people don't understand the gravity of their behavior and how it affects other people. If you don't have something nice to say, don't say it at all. If it's not
Mhm.
constructive criticism, shut your mouth, because then people wonder, like, for example, that girl got into that situation. It's unfortunate that she was murdered as a character. Very, very unfortunate. It shouldn't have escalated to that. But at the same time, her mouth, her words had consequences. And unfortunately, hers was lethal. Most people do not get to that level of having dire consequences, and that's a good thing. But y'all have to understand, watch what you say, because someone might snap because your words, because you needed to feel better about yourself, might just be the straw that broke the camel's back. So be kind. Just be kind to people. Just give a smile to someone. Like, you know what? I hope you have a wonderful day. Have a like spread kindness, because there's no reason to try and put someone else down to lift you up, because you're not really going anywhere if that's the way that you have to go. That's all I gotta say on that note. So I can kind of, it's weird. I'm sure you can attest to this. Once you start studying psychology and how people think and how they behave, you start to understand why they do things. But you
Mhm.
also have to try and make those people who do not understand psychology, you have to clarify it enough so that way you be like, I understand why they did this psychologically, but I am not excusing that behavior. Because there's that fine line of people like, well, oh my God, you justify that. No, I did not justify that. I'm just saying I can understand it and I can explain to you why they did it, just so that way you know why they did it. It doesn't mean they shouldn't be punished for it. So that's all I'm going to say on that.
Yeah, it's a very emotional topic when you start to discuss how people don't take responsibility for their words and their actions and how that impacts other people. And this is why empathy and being conscientious is such they're such coveted traits that really should be reinforced and practiced and encouraged consistently, because having the wherewithal to step outside of yourself and try to understand what someone else is experiencing or going through or feeling can make a world of a difference when it comes to making those beneficial and healthy connections with people. And that's why that character of Oh Sung-woo was so problematic, is because his traumatic experiences manifested themselves in a way that he was unable to empathize or take into consideration the pain that he was causing, not only physically, but emotionally and psychologically to people around him. And I also want to take this time to clarify what narcissism in relationships could look like. And this is based off of a Psychology Today article. When a narcissist like Song Woo-oh has a desire to kind of elicit a sense of admiration and praise, especially from potential romantic partners, they're going to become charming. They're going to be charismatic. They're also going to do things that they know will ignite a romance. So in his case, he was an incredibly attractive young man, and he knew it. And he knew the influence that he had, and he was not afraid to use it when he knew that someone was attracted to him. But unfortunately, narcissists like him have a deficit in empathy. So they're not able to think about their action. Well, they are able to, but they choose not to think about their actions and how it impacts someone else because that's of no interest to them. If it doesn't benefit me, what's the point in considering it? That's the mentality that goes with that. And that's why establishing long term relationships is so difficult and often impossible. Because in order to establish long-term consistent relationships with anyone, you need to be able to care about them and care about their well-being, even if it doesn't benefit you. And when they unfortunately, they're unable to fall in love for that reason. They're unable to build trusting equal partnerships because there's always a power dynamic. They have to be the one in control at all times. Otherwise, that situation is not worth it to them. And in that case with the woman that he kidnapped, she was the daughter of a CEO, and she knew it. And she knew the type of influence and power that she exuded. So she felt with her privilege, she was able to talk to anyone any old kind of way, which included him. Mind you, he was a stranger at the time. She had no idea who he was or what he was capable of. But she did not take into consideration that other people hurt when you do things like that. So hurting his ego was one of the worst things she could have possibly done. She did not at all deserve what happened to her, fictional or otherwise. But when you're dealing with a person like that, hurting their ego is a slight against them that cannot be fixed. They have to fix it on their own terms. And that's why it's you have to be careful with the people that you interact with. You're not to say that you're going to interact with or encounter a narcissist, but people that don't take your feelings into consideration and don't respect the boundaries that you put in place. Say you're on a date with someone and you've told them, very clearly that you're not comfortable kissing them because, I just met you, I'm trying to get to know you. Let's see how this goes. And they try to orchestrate scenarios where kissing is possible. The old reach around the yawn and put their arm around your shoulder and try to lean in and make a move when you're not looking, kind of thing. Like try to orchestrate these seemingly romantic gestures despite you vocalizing how uncomfortable that situation makes you. I would advise that you do what you can to escape that situation as soon as possible. Because if they're going to violate your boundaries once, they're going to continue to violate those boundaries. They've already proven to you, there's no need to question it. They've shown you that they don't respect the boundaries that you've put into place, which means they don't respect you as an individual and they will do what they want, whether you like it or not. So just a word of warning. That's one good way to tell whether or not someone is potentially good for you, is if they do not respect your boundaries, especially when you have openly and clearly told them what they are, you don't need to be around that person because they don't respect you.
Just piggybacking off of that, that is a very, very valid point, 100% valid point. If people do not respect your boundaries, because boundaries are something I think many of us are not taught, and it's a very skewed area, especially for women, especially for us women. It's like having boundaries is like unheard of. Oh my gosh. Because once a woman has boundaries, we're labeled all types of names to be called out of our names by. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, she's stuck up, or she's a B, and she's this and she's that because blah, blah, blah. No, have you actually thought that she's just establishing boundaries? You know, like if she doesn't want you to talk to her some type of way, don't do it. Like, oh, well, I'm asking you about your personal life. Well, tell me, did y'all do something? I don't want to talk about it. Well, why not? Because no is a complete answer. You know, like little things like that, we don't recognize as boundary violation a lot of the time, you know, and we tend to take a lot of offense because someone's not sharing information about themselves that we want to know, or if we tell someone to back off and they just keep pressuring and pressuring and pressuring us, like, well, I'm your family, so you have to tell me, or I'm your parent, you have to tell me, I'm your parent, you have to do this, or I'm your friend, so you should be doing this, or you should be like these little things, these little gaslighting, boundary violating things, we don't take into consideration because we're not aware a lot of the times that this is not a healthy way to behave. And that's very unfortunate. Like I had to learn that later in life about boundaries. I'm still learning about boundaries, especially tying into this story, like the dating realm. For example, like we're in a pandemic, you know, and the surge of online dating has been happening. And for apps like, you know, like the normal apps, I don't even have to name them. But for example, if you have a boundary of, okay, well, I don't meet anyone unless we've talked for X amount of time, and we have a video call at least a couple times, so I know you are who you say you are. If that person tries to be like, yeah, no, well, I don't want to do that, and then they get mad at you for establishing a boundary, that's a sign to just unmatch and keep going. Or from personal experience, when I was on the applications at one point, this one person was just like, hey, I want to engage with you intimately. And I set a boundary. I'm just like, listen, I don't do that. But if we were to get to that stage of level where we're comfortable and we wanted to, you need to get an STD test. And I will too. I had a previous test done. I can show you my results, or I would be happy to go and get another test together with you. So that way we can ensure that we're both safe and that we're both clean. So that way there's no surprises. You want to know what his response was? Ew, why would you say something like that? Now I think of you differently. Why would you want me to do that? That's disgusting. Like, how dare you ask me to do that? Because now that's just, well, you're such a weird person for asking that. And that was 100% a sign of, like, at first, a couple of years ago, it would have been like, oh, am I weird? Is that too much to ask? Like, am I such a bad person? But now, the more I have come to learn about myself and about my boundaries and what I value, which is my own health, I'm not going to give up my health for a night of quote unquote 9 times out of 10 disappointing fun. But it's like, if for someone to clearly try to lie or clearly try to make you feel bad just so they can get the easy way out of what they want, that's a tall tale sign of just keeping it moving. But unfortunately, we don't teach our girls, we don't teach our young women a lot of how to notice these signs and stick to their guns, stick to their guards of, honey, he's not worth it. That other person's not worth it. Whoever, whatever they identify with, they are not worth it. Do not allow them to damage your wall of boundaries, because if someone truly loved you, if someone truly respected you and truly cared about you, you wouldn't even have to question it. They wouldn't even question it. Oh, you don't want to talk about this? Okay, fine. If you need to vent to me, then I am here for you. But if you don't want to talk about it, we don't got to talk about it. Let's move on. So just something for you listeners, be aware of how people treat you when you try to establish a boundary. Even that so-called close friend you may have, if you see them trying to like push past and manipulate you to get what they want, maybe it's a time you better be second thinking about that friendship. You know, it can happen from anyone. Friends for like 20 dang years, or family members or whatever. If people are not respecting you, and respecting how you establish you want them to treat you, it ain't worth it, honey. Keep it moving. That's it about that.
Leo is absolutely right. People that care about you, truly care about you, will respect your boundaries. And when you tell them no, there is no third degree or 20 questions to get to the bottom of why. When you're comfortable, you explain, but also make sure you're being transparent because communication is a big piece of building those close connections as well. Make sure that you're working as hard as possible to be as completely transparent as possible with people that you care about, because giving them the agency to understand you a little bit better and the vulnerability that comes along with that makes you stronger as an individual when it comes to speaking your mind. Keeping those things bottled up all the time will only hurt you in the long run. So find someone that you trust. Find someone that has proven to you that they have your best interests at heart and work through those things with them. If you need a professional person to speak with, a trusted adult, someone that you know has been good to you, it would be a good idea to kind of try to work through that and try to seek help to gain more comfort and security in who you are and validate the experiences that you're going through, because do not suffer in silence. Things like this work best when they're behind closed doors and no one can see them. Shed some light on that problem so we can all identify what's happening and we can get help to people who need it.
Well, thank you. Like that was a very deep way to round it out and start bringing us to a close. We've already been going on for a bit here, so as you can tell, like there's so much that we can dissect when it comes to this series. This is just the opening; it's just the beginning. So before this gets too long, because we can go on for a good while about this. I think it'll be best that we're gonna leave you with this taste. We're gonna leave you with a taste of this information, and we're gonna do a part 2 to this segment because there's just so much that we can dive into when it comes to this topic. So on that note, thank you so much for listening with us to this far. I hope you were able to do some check-ins with yourself. Hopefully this wasn't too triggering for any of you. So we're going to close out with a quote, a really, really nice quote that Callie found. So if you wouldn't mind sending us off.
So this quote is by Shannon Thomas. A healthy relationship is a feast of affection for both people, not one receiving crumbs and trying to convince themselves it's enough. With that, you're enough, and you deserve to be treated with the utmost respect. Your boundaries should remain intact, and only people who love you and care about your well-being will respect them. Please keep that in mind, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. We'll see you in the next episode. I'm Callie.
And I'm Cleo. Goodbye.
Bye. Callie here. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode. To continue listening to us, like, subscribe, and comment on our YouTube channel. If you want some behind-the-scenes content, the links to our social media channels are in the description box below. Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Search Melanin_Muses. That's MELANIN_MUSES. See you guys next week.